What happens when a Muslim president grieves a Catholic pope? This is not just a political story. This is not just a religious moment. This is a human truth. On April 21, 2025, Pope Francis, the people's pope, the humble man in white, who changed the face of Catholicism, passed away peacefully in the Apostolic Palace. His final breath echoed across continents. But one voice, unexpected and quietly powerful, emerged from West Africa. Captain Ibrahy Trari, the young president of Bokhina Fasho, wrote not a statement but a letter, not from one leader to another, but from a son who had lost a father. In this deeply emotional tribute, Trari, a Muslim, honors a Catholic pope, not for his position, but for his compassion. "Your Holiness," he wrote, "though you never walked our soil, your prayers reached us. Your compassion healed us." This video explores that letter, word by word, line by line. And what it reveals is more than grief. It's a rare glimpse into spiritual kinship, into how love can cross every barrier, religion, race, even war. Stay with us, because what you're about to witness is not just a farewell. It's a redefinition of what unity can look like in a divided world. It's about faith that transcends doctrine, leadership that looks like service, and the enduring legacy of a man who made the Vatican feel like a village. If this moves you, share it. Let this story reach hearts still looking for hope in a fractured world. Welcome to A Son's Farewell, Ibrahy Trari's tribute to Pope Francis. The bells of St. Peter's Basilica tolled, not in celebration but in mourning. On Easter Monday, April 21, 2025, Pope Francis, the shepherd of over 1 billion souls, took his final breath at the age of 88. Just a day prior, he had delivered his last public blessing, embodying humility and grace. From the bustling streets of Rome to the remote villages of Bokhina Fasho, the world paused, not just to mourn a religious leader, but to reflect on a man who defied every expectation of his title. He was not born into grandeur. He didn't rule with judgment. Instead, he led with a trembling voice, worn shoes, and a heart heavy with mercy. The grief was universal, but one voice rose above the rest, soft, unexpected, and profoundly sincere. Captain Ibrahy Trari, the young Muslim president of a nation, often overlooked on the global stage, penned a letter, not to a head of state, not to a pope, but to a father he felt he had lost. "Your Holiness," it began, "I write to you not as a president, but as a son." What followed was more than a tribute. It was a confession of love, loss, and reverence, an extraordinary bridge between Islam and Christianity, between Africa and the Vatican, between power and humility. A Muslim leader mourning a Catholic pope? The idea alone demanded the world's attention. But the letter went beyond symbolism. It told a story of two men who never needed to share a religion to share a dream, for unity, for justice, for peace. This story, you won't find politics, you won't find protocol. You'll find something more powerful, vulnerability. You'll hear the trembling gratitude of a leader whose people were seen, heard, and prayed for from thousands of miles away. And you'll witness how the death of one man ignited something rarely found in the public square, a sincere spiritual kinship that speaks to the best in all of us. Stay with us as we explore a letter that moved the world, a son's farewell, a leader's lament, and a tribute that reminded us some losses are not defined by creed but by love. The morning light over Rome felt dimmer. As news of Pope Francis's passing spread, time seemed to slow. Headlines circled the globe, not with political drama or scandal, but with a shared ache that crossed oceans, languages, and faiths. The "People's Pope has died." It was a simple phrase, but it carried the weight of the world. In St. Peter's Square, thousands stood in silence, hands clasped, candles flickering in the crisp spring air. Some wept openly, others prayed. The Vatican's balcony, where the Pope had so often addressed the world, remained hauntingly empty. But his presence was everywhere, in the bowed heads, in the quiet sobs, in the air that seemed to throb with reverence. And it wasn't just in Rome. In Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, church bells rang beside the adhan, the Muslim call to prayer, as a tribute from both communities. In Manila, schools held a minute of silence. In Brazil, Rio's Christ the Redeemer was bathed in soft gold light. The world was not just mourning a religious figure, it was mourning a man who had touched it gently, boldly, universally. Pope Francis wasn't just a pope. He was a symbol of compassion over doctrine, humility over hierarchy. In South Korea, a woman lit incense in her apartment, whispering, "He made me believe again." In Nigeria, an imam led a prayer not for a pope, but for a good man who saw all faiths as one family. These weren't orchestrated gestures. They were spontaneous echoes of a leader whose message had always been rooted in radical simplicity, love without borders. And amid this global grief, something remarkable happened. Silence. The usual noise of controversy, skepticism, and division faded. In its place came unity. For once, the world seemed to breathe together. This moment, the stillness, the reverence, wasn't planned. It was earned. It was the result of a lifetime spent listening instead of preaching, embracing instead of judging. And in this collective pause, something sacred emerged. The realization that the most powerful legacy isn't carved in marble. It's carried in the hearts of people across the world, and one of those hearts, unexpectedly and profoundly, belonged to a young African president, Captain Ibrahy Trari. In the sea of condolences that followed Pope Francis's passing, one message pierced through the noise, not because of who sent it, but because of how deeply it resonated. It came from a place many wouldn't expect, the West African nation of Burkina Faso, and it was written by a man not of the same faith but of the same spirit. Captain Ibrahy Trari, the young and often controversial president of Burkina Faso, did not address the Vatican as a politician seeking diplomacy. He wrote as a son, mourning the loss of a spiritual father. "Your Holiness, I write to you not as a head of state to a pope, but as a son who has lost a father." His words landed softly, but their impact was thunderous. In an age where global leaders often speak in sound bites, Traoré's letter was a quiet revelation, thoughtful, heartfelt, and raw. It acknowledged not only the Pope's moral leadership but the personal comfort he had offered from a world away. "Though you never walked our soil, your prayers reached us. Your compassion healed us." For a nation scarred by violence and forgotten by many, Pope Francis had made them feel seen. But the letter didn't stop at gratitude. It was a testament to something rare, a bridge. Traoré, a Muslim, praised the Pope's unflinching call for justice, his refusal to let faith be a barrier, and his unwavering belief that love should lead where politics fail. "You reminded the world that justice is not confined by faith," he wrote. In one sentence, Traoré captured the essence of Francis's legacy, that the true measure of a leader is not how loudly they preach, but how deeply they listen. That unity is not forged by uniformity, but by respect. And that peace doesn't begin at a negotiating table. It begins when a man of one faith can genuinely grieve a leader of another. The letter, shared widely across international media, didn't just eulogize Pope Francis. It revealed how his message had transcended walls of doctrine, politics, and geography. And in doing so, Traoré became something more than a leader. He became a living echo of the very compassion Pope Francis had spent his life preaching. For many in the West, Pope Francis was a reformer within the marble halls of the Vatican. But in Africa, he was something far more intimate, a voice that reached across deserts, jungles, and broken roads. A man who, without grandeur or fanfare, stood beside the continent not as a visitor, but as a brother. Pope Francis's connection to Africa wasn't rooted in optics or diplomatic visits. It was rooted in empathy. He traveled where others didn't. Uganda, the Central African Republic, Egypt, Morocco, Mozambique, Madagascar, Mauritius. But even where his feet never touched the ground, like Burkina Faso, his presence was felt. His prayers carried across the Sahel like wind through the acacia trees. President Ibrahy Trari spoke to this connection in his letter. "Though you never walked our soil, your presence reached us." He recalled how Francis had personally sent Cardinal Philippe Ouedraogo with messages of hope, how he kept African clergy close, not as tokens, but as trusted voices. The Pope's bond with Africa was never performative. It was pastoral. One moment in particular stands out in Traoré's memory, a moment that, to many Africans, remains legendary. During a historic 2015 visit to the Central African Republic, Pope Francis removed his shoes before stepping into a mosque in Bangui. He entered hand in hand with an imam, Christian and Muslim, shoulder to shoulder. That single act did more than any speech could. It showed that peace was not just a prayer, it was a possibility. Traoré remembered it vividly. "That day," he wrote, "you showed us peace was possible." For a continent too often viewed through the lens of conflict, Francis offered a counter-narrative, that dignity, healing, and interfaith respect were not just idealistic dreams. They were actionable truths. Even in death, his connection to Africa endured. In Uganda, villagers placed fresh flowers beneath a sun-faded photo of him. In Burkina Faso, Christians and Muslims gathered to light candles together. And in the Sahel, where violence still threatens daily life, Pope Francis's name is whispered, in mosques and churches alike, not as a religious figure, but as a human being who cared. He was never a distant pontiff to Africa. He was family, and to President Traoré, he was the spiritual father of a people the world often forgets. The final chapter of Pope Francis's life unfolded with the same humility that defined his papacy. It was not marked by spectacle, but by stillness. The man who had led the church with worn shoes and an open heart spent his last days surrounded by the quiet prayers of those closest to him. On Easter Monday, April 24, 2025, inside the Apostolic Palace, the Shepherd of Billions took his final breath at 6:45 a.m., leaving behind not just a vacancy in the Vatican, but an emptiness in the soul of the world. In those final hours, he asked for Scripture to be read aloud. A young priest opened the Gospel of John and read softly, "I am the resurrection and the life." As those words filled the room, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, the 266th Pope of the Roman Catholic Church, closed his eyes and returned to the Father he had served with quiet devotion. Nearby, the papal aides, doctors, and a handful of cardinals wept not for a title, but for a man they loved. Cardinal Kevin Farrell performed the ancient ritual that confirmed the Pope's passing, calling his birth name 3 times, Jorge Mario Bergoglio. No answer, just silence. A sacred hush, broken only by the sound of quiet sobs and the tolling of bells moments later. The Vatican moved swiftly, as tradition demanded. The ring of the fisherman, symbol of papal authority, was ceremoniously broken. Preparations began for his body to lie in state at St. Peter's Basilica, where millions were expected to file past in mourning. But Pope Francis had made one final, deeply personal request. No marble, no golden tomb, no grandeur. He wished to be buried simply, in the earth, with nothing more than the vestments of his papacy and a modest summary of his life. In this final act, he left the world one last lesson: that greatness does not demand monuments, that holiness wears no crown, and that in the end, it is not the power we accumulate, but the love we leave behind that defines us. Pope Francis died the way he lived, quietly, humbly, with grace. And in doing so, he reminded us all, even in death there is dignity. Even in farewell there is faith. When the world lost Pope Francis, it did not lose a man in robes. It lost a man who washed the feet of strangers, who chose mercy over might, who listened more than he spoke. And when Ibrahy Trari wept, he did not cry for a pope. He cried for a father, a friend, a moral light that shone across a continent scarred by silence. And maybe that's the real miracle of this moment, that across all we're taught to fear, difference, belief, borders, there can still exist a bridge. One man from a Muslim country, writing a love letter to a Catholic soul. No politics, no camera crews, just truth. Let that sink in, because this wasn't just a farewell. It was a challenge to all of us, to choose understanding over suspicion, to grieve like family, not factions, to see in others not their faith or flag, but their humanity. Pope Francis left this world asking for a simple grave, no marble, no monument. But what he built in the hearts of men like Trari, that is his monument. And now, it's in our hands. Will we honor that legacy? Will we dare to see each other beyond our walls? Or will we scroll past untouched, you decide? Because the next time a shepherd falls, the question won't be who leads next. It'll be, have we learned to follow the path he paved? If this moved, you say it, share it. Let the world hear that unity still matters. Thank you, Pope Francis. Thank you, President Trari. You showed us what love looks like when the world forgets how to feel.